Hey everyone. You are attending a forum of the Upper West Side Coalition of Block Associations and Community Groups. We've come together, about 30 block and neighborhood associations throughout the entire Upper West Side, and joined with many of the leading nonprofits organizations who are working to help so many of us in our community in so many ways. If you're interested in learning more, please reach out to us. Check out our website, sign up for our newsletter, and if you want some neighbors to help you start, revive, or maybe improve your block association, please be in touch because we'd like to help you. Tonight, we are holding a candidate forum, presenting the candidates seeking to succeed Danny O'Donnell in the New York State Assembly 69th District. The candidates who have joined us are in the Democratic primary being held next Tuesday, which is the 25th. Of course, there's early voting already underway for those of you who can check to see, because you can vote today. So please let us just introduce the names before they talk about themselves and their concerns. Jack Kellner is with us, Michael Lasher, Eli Northrup, and Melissa Rosenberg. Carmen Quinones was invited but chose not to participate. This is a community dialogue among neighbors, and we're appreciative that these candidates are with us this evening, willing to serve our community. A community dialogue, and please, let's move forward with that as our guide. We are neighbors. Candidates, we ask you to introduce yourselves and take 2 minutes to do so to those who might be less familiar with each of you. We'll rotate in alphabetical order. Again, 2 minutes for each response so that we are fairly able to get around. We'll get to public safety. We'll get to pedestrian safety, housing, cannabis, seniors, education, so much more during this hour. I hope it's also acceptable to refer to you by your first names. So if we can begin with Jack. Jack, please take 2 minutes to introduce yourself to our community.
Well, thank you, Steve, and thank you to the host, the Coalition of Upper West Side Block Associations. I am a former block association president myself years ago, so I appreciate the work that you all do and the help that you give to the community. And I want to wish everyone a happy holiday. I am a physician. I have my MD from SUNY Downstate. I trained in Brooklyn. I also have my law degree from Fordham University here on the Upper West Side, and I have an MPH from Columbia. I am running because I attended a couple of similar forums before I was a candidate, and I saw some of the candidates, and I was basically thought we need someone different. I saw registered lobbyists. I saw career politicians. I saw Albany insiders. I didn't see enough diversity in backgrounds. So I thought it would be very interesting to have a physician in the legislature. I feel very qualified because I feel as a physician and a psychiatrist that I can bring perspective to some of the issues that we're facing right now, especially with the mentally ill, possibly hospital closures. And I also want to advocate for tax reform, for increased standard deduction to put more money in the pockets of folks. So again, thank you very much. And I'm very pleased to be here today. And great, thanks.
Thank you, Jack. Michael Lasher, please introduce yourself to our community.
Thanks, Steve. I'm Micah. Nice to see everybody, and I'm incredibly grateful to you, to the coalition for hosting this this forum. I believe it is it may be the final one of our campaign. So we've been on a long journey, so there's a bittersweetness to it. And I also want to really thank every member of the coalition and everyone who has signed on tonight for all that they do to make the Upper West Side the best place in the world. I'm a lifelong Upper West Sider. I grew up here. and I consider it the most fortunate the most fortunate thing that I was able to be raised on the Upper West Side. I'm now raising three kids of my own here. They're 13, 12, and 8, in the same playgrounds as I grew up playing in. And it's an enormous privilege, and I see what this community can give to its children and its families. And I have tried in different ways over the years to give back. I've been very active in my school PTAs. I've coached Westside Little League. For the last 10 years, I've been on the board of the Riverside Park Conservancy. I've served as chair for the last 5, and really working to do everything we can to make our extraordinary Riverside Park even greater. And so it's hard to express just how much connection and love I have for this community. Professionally, I've worked in public service for the better part of my career. I started as an aide to Congressman Nadler. I worked at City Hall in the Bloomberg administration. I was chief of staff in the state attorney general's office, and I was director of policy for the state until January. And in those roles, a lot of the issues that we all have spoken about during this campaign, that I'm sure we'll speak about tonight, affordable housing, mental health care, public education. I'm very proud of the record that I've developed of making meaningful progress on those issues. And so when there was an opportunity to continue that public service, but to do it as a representative for the community that I love so much, it would be the privilege of a lifetime to represent the Upper West Side in the State Assembly, and that's why I'm running. And I, again, thank everybody for their time this evening.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Micah. We also have several dozen viewers on YouTube watching live, and the chat is open, and we will have questions that have been submitted and questions that come out from the chat and from those in the of the Upper West Side Coalition who have gathered here in the Zoom. Eli Northrop, please join us.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, everybody. I do want to acknowledge that this is happening on Juneteenth, and it's been a long week of early voting already, and this seemed like the best day to do it. But we should take a moment to recognize this day in our history and the systemic racism that still exists in America. That we need to be actively pushing back on every single day. My name's Eli Northrop. I'm also running for state assembly here in the 69th District. I've been in New York for 20 years. I went to college at Cornell, came down to the city to go to law school at NYU. I clerked for federal judges in the Southern District of New York and the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, and I've spent my career as a public defender. So while I'm new to politics, I've been representing people for my entire career. And like Jack, I am not a political insider. I've spent my career standing next to those who don't have political power and pushing back. About 6 years ago, I started to go to Albany to fight for systemic change because of all the inequity that I saw. And what I wasn't prepared for was what I would see in Albany, which is a culture dominated by insiders and lobbyists and money, which influences people, and not a ton of people who are accountable to their communities. The Upper West Side is an amazing place, Morningside Heights, amazing neighborhoods because of how involved people are here. In fact, this has one of the highest concentration of Democratic voters in the entire country. And we have block associations, we have neighborhood groups, we have people that advocate and are involved. And all of us can tell you from campaigning over the last 6 months, the conversations are different here than other places because we have people who are already leaders. What I think we need up in Albany is somebody who is independent of those insiders, independent of that special interest money, who will really fight for our community. And that's what I've done for my entire career. Danny O'Donnell has been our assembly member for 2 decades. And he has been important for this neighborhood because he is independent of those things. Danny's supporting me in this race. I really hope you will too. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Eli. Melissa Rosenberg, please.
Hi, everyone. Happy Juneteenth. And I'll say it's good to see some familiar faces from my work on the community board the last 7 years. I'm here tonight because of my love for advocacy and public service and really improving our community. I started my career in nonprofits, working in direct services related to helping Jewish seniors feel less isolated. And doing that work, I felt I wanted to make change and help my community on an even higher level and make a bigger impact. And that's when I started my work as an advocate. I've been an advocate around strengthening New York's medical workforce and diversifying it, around addressing gun violence and intimate partner violence. And the issue that I still work on today is housing advocacy and addressing our homelessness crisis. That's an issue that I think will be heavily featured in our discussion, but one that is very close to my heart and has really guided my work on our community board. I chaired our housing committee for the last 4 years and got to hear a lot from folks on the ground struggling to pay their rent and from night tenants struggling to get repairs. I decided to step up and run and move from being a policy person and working behind the scenes to being an even more vocal advocate, because I felt I wasn't seeing the kind of change come down from Albany that really is urgent right now. As a renter who faces, extreme anxiety every time my lease is renewed, and seeing the growing street homelessness we're facing every day, I think there's too much urgency to keep with the status quo. And I'll also say, as a young woman and an ally, given what I'm seeing on the national stage and the threats to our rights, the threats to trans rights, I felt we need younger voices. We need voices of people who are not afraid to stand up to power, to push back against vocal minorities. And that inspired me to really jump in the race. So I want to continue to be a voice for this community like I've been doing so for the last 7 years. And I look forward to hearing your questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Melissa. Let's get started. Public safety. Some residents say that the Upper West Side is less safe today, and that more crime, street crime, is prevalent and needs to be addressed. One neighbor, Molly Sugarman, sent in a question specifically asking about your views on the current bail laws. Please share your thoughts on public safety, and we'll separately focus upon the dangers of crossing the street and pedestrian safety. So first we'll talk about public safety. And Micah, if you could start us off on that, please.
Sure. 2 minutes is not a lot of time to cover a big topic, but I'll just say very briefly, I think two things can be true at the same time. Number one, we have seen meaningful upticks in crime since the pandemic. That is, if you look at violent felonies, nonviolent felonies, misdemeanors, each of them is up between 25 and 40% from pre-pandemic levels. And at the same time, we're still a much safer city than we were 20 years ago, and safer than other cities nationally. So it can both be true that we're not in the bad old days, and that we've seen a meaningful increase in crime that we shouldn't accept, and that we shouldn't have to just, and we certainly shouldn't pretend it doesn't exist. And I think you need to start from that honest discussion of where we are to enter the public safety conversation. And I think we do have to take that uptick seriously, and I think addressing it means working with the local precinct and the district attorney to respond to neighborhood safety issues, crime hotspots. That is going to involve the NYPD. I don't believe we can deal with public safety without the police. They are an important part of that equation at the same time as we invest in long-term community investment and programs that will help people have lives that do not lead them into the criminal justice system. With regard to the bail law, I think the reality is, if you look at the bail law as it exists today, we have low-level offenses that are not bail eligible. That is the significant change that remains from the pre-2019 law. I think that is the right thing. That is the just thing. But in terms of judicial discretion, in terms of significant crimes, we are basically back to the 2019 status quo ante. And I don't believe the evidence supports the notion that it is the bail laws that is driving the crime uptick. I think there are a host of complex issues. I think we have not done some of the work we need to do to make the discovery laws work. I think we're seeing an increase in dismissals because the DA's office is not able to bring a lot of these cases to trial. And I think that is an issue. So we have a lot of work to do on public safety, and I don't think we should pretend the public safety issues away or pretend that we can deal with them without law enforcement, but it is a complicated picture and we need to have an honest conversation about it.
Thanks, Micah. Eli, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, the first thing we need to have in any community is a feeling that we can be outside on our streets, in our parks, on our public transit, and feel safe. That is so important because those public gathering spaces are what make New York City a special place to be. And if we don't have that, our city will start to deteriorate. And I understand the feeling. And I think there is a mental health crisis that we need to treat as such that has emerged after the pandemic and perhaps is more pronounced at this time. And I'm in favor of responses to that mental health crisis that are true solutions that make us safer. So, mental health investments include different responses to people who are dealing with mental health issues. It includes, like the pilot program we have right now is called Be Heard, with social workers responding alongside police officers to people who are dealing with mental health issues. I've spoken with police officers who don't feel equipped to really respond in those situations. And I think we need alternative solutions there. I think we need investment in supportive housing and alternative treatment courts. I practice in criminal court. I see judges who say, I would place this person in a mental health treatment if it existed, but it doesn't exist. And so those investments need to be made. There's a bill called Treatment, Not Jail, which would meaningfully do this. I am for accountability for people that cause harm. I'm also for accountability for agencies that are tasked with solving harm. I think Rikers Island is actually a place that is making us less safe. I've spent time there. I know people that have spent time there. People cycle in and out of that place and they come back to our communities and they are destabilized. So we need different solutions, certainly, to these issues. I think I agree with Micah that there is a lot of misunderstanding about what the bail law does and doesn't do. And if we are looking at that and treating that as the problem with our community safety, then we're never going to get to a solution. I also just want to say, I would like our police to be more accountable to our communities. We used to have police officers and we knew them by their name because they would walk around on our streets and our blocks, and we don't see that anymore. They show up in a police car and they respond after something has happened. There's not a lot of meaningful prevention. And I'm in favor of community in general, and that includes our police. Thank you.
Thanks, Eli. Melissa, please.
Yeah, I mean, this is a good question and one I'm definitely sensitive to as well as a young woman. And I think we've all been hearing a lot, in the media or the Citizen app about incidents that are threatening our safety. But as my colleagues in here sort of referred to, I think it's really important to take a data-driven approach and an evidence-based approach to an issue that's so important like this one. And it really has significant impacts on folks' lives if they do experience incarceration. But that being said, I do think, it's a valid feeling to have. And I do think increased investments in community policing are really important. I think we're seeing a lot of burnout in our police force, which is leading to, less engagement in our communities and just a less active and preventative mindset when it comes to the boots on the ground in our police force. That being said, I do believe in more preventative approaches to crime. I think that there's a lot that we can do in terms of providing social services that can get at some of the causes of crime, especially when it comes to things like petty crimes committed by youth, things like youth programming that prevents kids from potentially going and committing retail theft could be a much better solution than, let's say, giving a kid a criminal record for the first time. So as much as we can have smart solutions for safety that are not carceral, that's an approach that I would favor. But again, also would support, investment in community policing to make us all feel safer, make our public spaces feel accessible.
Thanks, Melissa. Jack, please.
Okay. Well, I can tell you that I personally definitely feel less safe on the streets than I did before the pandemic. And in many ways, perception is reality on this issue. One of the problems is we do have a lot of mentally ill people who have been deinstitutionalized and dumped on the street without the supportive care and the help that they need. And that's one of the reasons I'm actually running for the office, because I feel I can bring a lot of knowledge from having worked on locked psychiatric institutions, locked units, and treated schizophrenia and treated manic depression and treated depression. And we got to get people who need treatment off the streets, off the subways, and into treatment. Got to get people the care they need. I'm also concerned about the hate crimes that are going on right now. Anti-Semitic hate crimes are up 60% over last year, I guess related to the Israeli conflict with the Palestinians. Anti-Muslim crimes. I'm married to a woman of color who is very petite, and I'm very worried about her sometimes when she comes home and tells me she was followed and people were watching her. So we need to come together to keep everyone safe on the streets and make our city better.
Thank you. I want to switch to pedestrian safety. A little bit different. Among the most talked about topics on the Upper West Side is the risk of crossing the street, even the sidewalk sometimes. And what's mentioned is bikes of all types and all riders of all types on e-bikes, non-electrified bikes, and significant challenges throughout the Upper West Side dodging them and trying to get around. And it's not just for those of us who are seniors, but there's a lot of other people with strollers and all sorts of other assists that they need to do to get around. And it's for many people rough out there. Eli, do you want to start us off on that?
Yeah, and this is an issue that I think I've heard more about than almost any other issue. And obviously, as somebody who lives here, I see it myself every single day. The sense of lawlessness around our traffic rules with respect to bikers, and a feeling that if you step off the curb, you're going to get hit. We've got sidewalk sheds for restaurants that are over bike lanes, and it just creates this feeling of perilousness on our streets. It's something we need to address. It's time for us to meaningfully address this. I think there's things that can be done longer term, like street design to increase street safety, to ensure that bike lanes are separate and we don't have people going every which way. But there also needs to be some measures of enforcement against these actions. A lot of the individuals on e-bikes, are people who are doing food deliveries. There's been a huge uptick in food delivery in our neighborhood since the pandemic. That's true. And I think we all contribute to that, but that doesn't mean we're asking for dangerous drivers. So I would be in favor of a licensing and insurance system for these e-bikes. I would be in favor of enforcement. I would propose that enforcement against delivery drivers happen against the delivery companies, the apps, because many of these people are they are contracted individuals or don't get full benefits and are pushed hard to go very, very fast to make as many deliveries as possible. We need to change that behavior by getting to it at the source, the companies that are urging them to do this. And I think if you enforced tickets against them, they would be encouraging their drivers to have road education, also to go slower and pay attention to the traffic rules. And that would provide meaningful difference in what we're seeing. It's an issue that needs to be attacked in many, many ways, but those are two that I would commit to working on.
Thank you. Melissa.
Sure, yeah. This is an issue that, it's really important to me and I've been talking about throughout my campaign. And like Eli, I've definitely heard a lot about from constituents. So I think on e-bikes, it's a really difficult issue. I definitely have had a lot of close calls. I'm a runner, but I don't want to put enforcement in the wrong place. I don't think that just ticketing more and more, though I support enforcement, of course, is the right solution. I think really going after the source of the bad behavior, which is the app delivery companies. So many of these e-bikes are used by delivery workers. I would say the vast majority. I've talked to delivery workers who have reported that app companies literally ping them asking where they're going and why they're off course and why they're late when they stop to use the bathroom. That's the kind of behavior that is influencing these delivery workers to unsafe practices. And that's where I want to focus our attention rather than trying to potentially license low-income people of color who might be undocumented. And I just don't see that really being a feasible system for a lot of workers. But to step beyond just e-bikes, I think investment in infrastructure for our streets, especially bike lanes, though it seems maybe counterintuitive, some would increase public safety when there are places for bikes to go. They tend to adhere to the rules if we give them enough space to be in the bike lanes, for instance. So I think putting that infrastructure in place is a priority. But also, the state does control our ability to install red light cameras. So ensuring that we're also doing enforcement against bad actors in vehicles is something we should be talking about as well. I was pleased to see Sammy's law pass so we could reduce some speed limits on our city streets, but I think we need to go farther. On the community board, we've been supportive of rules around daylighting, ensuring there's visibility around corridors to protect pedestrians. That's something else I definitely want to advocate for.
Thank you. Jack?
Yes. We definitely need licensing for bicycles with motors, mopeds, motorized bicycles. They're like vehicles, and we're having lots of accidents, and we're scaring a lot of people crossing the street and with these vehicles. And also, I favor a mandatory class for those people who are using bikes commercially, either regular bike or a motorized bike, that they have a class in the rules of the road and to make them aware of the danger that operating a bicycle improperly could cause. We have more people hit by bikes today than by cars. This has to stop. This has to stop. And there's also been a recent rise in moped. I think it's called a snatch and grab crime, where someone on a motorized vehicle comes and commits a robbery, and they're on their way, and there's no license on the vehicle. There's no way of tracking them. And unless a camera catches it, we're not going to get that person into justice. So I was the first candidate to mention licensing mopeds in the race. I'm very happy to hear other people are in favor. And I think we need to do more to protect our citizens, our pedestrians. Thank you.
Thank you. Micah?
I agree with much of what has been said. I am a longstanding supporter of licensing and registration. I believe we should go after the app-based delivery companies to remove the incentives for these guys to fly around the neighborhood. But I think one important thing that, maybe there's a slight distinction here. I think we should enforce the laws that are on the books, that when people are riding recklessly, that there should be an enforcement action, and it shouldn't just be through the app-based delivery companies, both because it's an indirect approach, and it's not the problem is not limited to food delivery guys. And so if somebody is riding the wrong way down a one-way bike lane or riding an e-bike on the sidewalk, we should expect the police department to pursue enforcement. That doesn't mean throwing somebody in jail for riding their bike on the sidewalk, but it does mean people understanding that this is not okay. And I just don't think that we should take the position that we're only going to deal with this issue in a sort of 10,000-foot level. At a certain point, if we've got something that's happening on the ground that is illegal, that is terrorizing people, we should take the most direct approach to responding to it, while we also enact these more long-term policy solutions like licensing and registration, which I do think is very important.
Thank you. We're going to move now to the issue of housing. Ilan Rabinovich sent in a comment that indicated his belief that all of you have expressed interest in joining the State Assembly's Housing Committee. So that's an indication of something about your focus on housing. Let's go to Upper West Side Coalition Vice President Neil Burson, who leads the West 90s Association, because he's got a housing question too.
Thank you, Steve, and good evening, candidates. The challenge of finding or even remaining in an affordable apartment is a big issue on the Upper West Side, as you undoubtedly know. What are you going to do about this problem?
We're going to start, thanks, Neil. We're going to start with Melissa on that.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. As I mentioned, one that I routinely struggle with. So thank you for raising it. So I think there's two sides to this. I think one is ensuring that folks who are in their apartments can stay in them and get reasonable rent increases, which is something I'm definitely a believer in. And, you know, I was pleased to see something done around good cause eviction, though it is far, far from perfect. Ensuring people can stay in their homes is definitely a priority and really saves us from having people enter shelter and that trauma and that cost. But the other side of it is really that it's a supply issue. We have not been doing enough to keep up creating new homes for people as we create new jobs in New York City. And we're just feeling the symptoms of decades of a lack of investment in new housing right now. And we're trying, you know, our hardest to build our way out of it, but we need to be doing more and using really every tool in the tool chest to address this crisis. And to me, that's both creating new units of housing of all types, including, you know, capital A affordable housing financed by the city, but other housing types as well. I think we need to be ensuring that, you know, areas of New York City and of New York State that haven't been doing their fair share to create housing and ease this crisis and have really prevented new affordable housing, especially from being cited in locally, to do their fair share, which will help ease the crisis in the city. And I think we need to see more investment in housing to serve our more vulnerable populations. That's something that did not get done in the state budget this year. We didn't see vouchers for low-income people pass in the state budget. We didn't see investment in old programs like supportive housing get into the budget. So that's something I definitely want to advocate for to ensure the most vulnerable New Yorkers don't get left behind.
Thank you. Jack?
Yes. Well, the good cause eviction bill, a watered down version of it, but it did pass. So what we need to do is watch how the housing court and the housing judges interpret and apply that law over the next few months. And it might have to be strengthened. We may have to revisit it. But first, we have to see how the judges are going to apply it. When we talk about housing, we never talk about NYCHA for some reason. We don't talk about NYCHA. NYCHA is very, very important. A lot of people live in NYCHA, and they live under unsatisfactory conditions. We have people with pest control problems. We have lead paint still on some walls. We have mold and mildew that people are breathing in spores every day and making their asthma worse and causing asthma, which is an epidemic in New York City, by the way, for young people. So we need to invest more in NYCHA and into our public housing, upgrading the systems and also taking charge of the systems to housing. These buildings were built by Robert Moses back in the 1960s, most of them. They're old. They need work. They need care. And another thing I'm going to do regarding housing is in my community district office, I'm going to have a full-time expert on housing to help constituents who have problems, not just rentals, but also with NYCHA and Mitchell Lama and Section 8. We're going to have a full-time person to help constituents with housing. Another thing is, everyone talks about it, the commercial buildings conversion to residential use. That's a very hard thing to do because the structures are very different. You know, there's codes for residential units that don't exist with commercial buildings, which tend to be square or rectangular. So I want to explore changing some codes and seeing what we can do to convert more housing from commercial buildings that are underused.
Thanks, Jack. Micah, please comment.
I appreciate a lot of what has been said, particularly Jack's highlighting of NYCHA. We have so many of our fellow New Yorkers living in housing that if the New York City Housing Authority were a private landlord, it would be considered absolutely criminal what is happening, and that is something we cannot take our eyes off of and cannot stop advocating for meaningful change. And I certainly agree with what Melissa said. You know, we can do a lot to protect people in their homes, but at the end of the day, we're dealing with a massive shortage of housing in this state that is creating an enormous economic pressure on everybody in the housing market. If you're a rent stabilized tenant, you're being pressured by your landlord. If you're a market rate tenant, you're seeing your rent skyrocket. If you're a co-op owner, you're seeing your maintenance numbers go up. And if you're trying to find a different apartment or you're a young person looking for a place to live in this community, forget about it. And at the end of the day, unless we build something like 1 million units of housing in the state of New York over the next decade, we are going to be short of what we need to meet the needs of the population. And I was very proud to be the lead architect of something called the Housing Compact, which was a package of legislation that the New York Times said was the first serious attempt by a governor since the Rockefeller administration to take on exclusionary zoning and redlining and really try to build housing in places that have not allowed housing to be built for 50 years. You know, we have invested billions of dollars in our commuter rail, and you look at train stations in the near suburbs, places that are a half hour by train from the central business district, and there's no housing. And if we are going to relieve the pressure on our housing market, we have to take that on, and the state has a big role to play. And I'll just lastly plug an idea that I've been working on with the city controller, Brad Lander, to use city pension fund dollars to co-purchase homes with city workers. And the idea would be double the purchasing power for our teachers, our firefighters, our municipal employees, enable them to buy a home in the 5 boroughs, live in the city that they're working in, and it's an inducement to people to come work for the public sector where we have a major staffing shortage. So that's a creative idea that I brought to the table on housing. I have many more, but at the heart of it, we must begin digging out of a hole of decades of underproduction of housing.
Thanks, Micah. Eli, please join us.
Yeah, you know, I agree with many of the ideas and the plans that have been mentioned. It is extremely important that we have affordable housing in this city because housing is community. Housing creates safety. Housing creates stability. It is more than just a commodity. And the problem, and I think what everyone should be focused on, is not necessarily who has the best ideas, but who can you trust to actually stand up and fight for them. You know, we have a good idea, good cause eviction. Up in Albany, it gets watered down and it doesn't protect all tenants. We have a good idea, like the housing compact that Micah worked on. Unfortunately, it has not been executed. And what I have seen from going up to Albany as an advocate, from representing tenants in housing court, from being a tenant, a rent stabilized tenant myself, who is subject to the Rent Guidelines Board, which is a political group that has been taken over by the real estate industry, is that the real estate industry has outsized power in Albany and over our state. And it is preventing us from getting policies that benefit the most individuals. I am the candidate in the race who is not taking money from that industry. I am the candidate who is a rent stabilized tenant, who is endorsed by tenants groups such as Tenants PAC and Met Council Action, because we need people who will push back. If we don't have that, no matter what we say about all these good ideas, we're not going to have affordable housing for the most of us. Yes, we need to build more, undoubtedly. And I'm in favor of a form of social housing because I don't think the market is going to do this for us. But we need to protect tenants. We need to protect our tenants in our rent stabilized buildings all over this community. And we need to do that meaningfully by protecting the gains we won in 2019 and for rent stabilized and rent controlled tenants, and having a true form of good cause and a right to counsel in housing court. I will also be sure to have a staff that is versed in housing issues. I myself am versed in them. We need to be able to stay in our homes, and that includes our older adults, of whom we have many in this neighborhood, who are constantly at risk of being destabilized. So who can you trust to actually execute on these plans?
Thank you, Eli. The next subject also is definitely housing related. From Dale Brown, president of the West 79th Street Block Association and a vice president of our coalition. You've got a question for candidates, Dale. Please join us.
First of all, I want to thank you, all the candidates, for joining us. This is really important, and you're really reaching a large group of people, and this is more like a one-on-one, which is really spectacular. My question is, there are several different kinds of shelters on the Upper West Side. What is your view on how best to move forward addressing issues of homelessness?
So we're going to start with Jack, please.
Well, definitely homelessness is a very big problem in our community. And I would have to say nationwide, it's a major problem, and we have to address it. Shelters need staffing, adequate staffing to help the people in the shelters. Sometimes the shelters are for people with dual diagnosis. Sometimes the people have mental health issues. We need to have nurses there sometimes. We need to have social workers there. We can't just dump people in a shelter and expect them to survive, and then after a certain period of time, they're back out on the streets again. So another way to address homelessness is by giving people the skills and the education they need to have good, productive jobs. And we have failed on that. We have failed since President Reagan came into office. It's gotten worse and worse. We have to provide opportunity for education and training for those people who do not have it, so that they can get better jobs, they can get their own housing, and they can have more self-respect.
Thank you, Jack. Micah?
You know, I'll start with the radical proposition that at the end of the day, the best way to solve homelessness is with homes. And when you look at, obviously homelessness is a complicated problem, and it certainly should not be oversimplified. And people have a wide range of challenges, as Jack talks about, and those challenges need to be met. But at the end of the day, people are homeless because they cannot afford a place to live. And they cannot afford a place to live because we do not have enough homes at a cost that people can afford. Whether that is somebody who's struggling, or even somebody who's just working a real working class job, who maybe hits a bump in the road. And if we're ever going to ultimately make a dent in the homelessness crisis, it goes back to the housing conversation. We're going to need to create a lot more housing of all kinds of different stripes. Supportive housing, middle income housing, low income housing. We do need housing access vouchers. So that is, we jump to talk about the shelter system. At the end of the day, the shelter system is in effect a Band-Aid response to a structural economic problem. Now, at the same time, our shelter system is not what it should be in terms of safety and administration and staffing. As Jack said, it is in fairness being taxed in a way that it never has been before because of the city's decision to rely on our shelter system to house the migrant population. I think that is something we need to move away from over time, because we're going to have the influx of newcomers is going to be with us for a while. This is not a short-term problem. And so the city addressed it as though it were a short-term crisis that was going to go away very quickly, and they sort of treated it as a homelessness problem. It is I wouldn't even describe it as a problem. It's a governmental challenge and an opportunity of a different stripe. And we need to build in a long-term governmental response to connecting people who come here to housing and services and jobs, relieve pressure on the shelter system, hold that system accountable for much higher performance levels of safety, and at the end of the day, focus on solutions that get people into stable housing.
Thank you, Micah. Eli?
Yeah, I agree with much of that. And if you've spoken with some of the individuals that are experiencing homelessness and you understand what's going on, it's not that the shelter system is necessarily broken. It's that the shelter system is not a long-term solution. People can go to a shelter for a period of time, but that will not transition them to getting off of the street. We need long-term solutions. And what I've seen both in my work and in my daily life and walking around our neighborhood is we have people that may cycle in and out of the shelter system and cycle in and out of jail or cycle in and out of drug treatment and come back to us. And how do we transition into off-ramps from that cycle? I think it is meaningful investment. The number one thing that I have seen take people out of those cycles is supportive housing. It's a holistic approach where people don't just have a place to be. This is kind of like a housing first model. You provide housing to address these other issues. But they also have social workers. They have people to help them navigate these other systems that are impacting their lives. If we are looking to the shelter system to solve these problems, again, we are not going to get to a real solution. I would embrace and hope, and what I love about our neighborhood and many of the shelters that do exist here is, please go volunteer in that shelter. Go get to know the people there and see them in their full humanity and get involved. And we have a lot of that in this neighborhood. We have people that want to be involved and want to welcome people in. When that happens and shelters are embraced in communities, it can really change the dynamic, and I think is a really important part of how we build community and build safety here. But ultimately, the real answer is more housing, as Micah stated, and not just a reliance on a tax shelter system.
Thanks, Eli. Melissa?
Sure, thanks. This is an issue I've worked on. I've worked closely with providers. I've heard a lot from them about what works and what doesn't, why folks have an average length of stay in shelter of around a year. And a lot of it does come down to housing supply, like my colleagues referenced. But I do want to differentiate that there are sort of two different problems, I think, at work here. And one is definitely a housing supply issues. There are folks who are in general population shelters who might have had an unexpected medical expense or fallen behind on rent. And for those folks, creating more housing and ensuring that they have access to vouchers, but also vouchers that are actually useful and that landlords have to accept, that's really the answer to try to decrease the census of the general population homeless folks. But then I'll say for those experiencing mental illness, we need to be ensuring that we're investing in community mental health resources, that we have good quality shelters and safe havens that folks feel safe in so they can start to stabilize. And then that we're investing in and maintaining supportive housing so that folks can transition to independent living and really have that sense of security that enables them to get their health together, to pursue their education and really get their lives back on track. On shelters, I have worked a lot on them in my professional life, also on the community board. I've seen a lot of these fights play out. And I think, a lot of the fear and concern comes from the fact that, people don't know, a lot of people who are unhoused haven't had these conversations, but also that our providers are asked to do less with more by the city and by the state. And we need to make sure that we're providing the resources needed to provide good programming on site for these shelters and really provide the services that enable people to get back on their feet.
Thanks, Melissa. We're going to move on a second. I just want to acknowledge in the Zoom room the Executive Director of Project Find, Mark Jennings, who is on our board, and I see him and his organization as part of the solution to some of these issues. So, Mark, thank you for joining us. On to the next topic. Many of us in our community and perhaps throughout the city have really been appalled by the state program to introduce the legal sale of weed. Now, I know there's new laws that have now been passed, the new rules, and some progress has been made, but this project ended up not launching really the legal sale, but really launched a full-scale assault with illegal sales throughout the city and on the Upper West Side especially. So it's a state program that resulted in a total mess. I think most would agree. It's not the finest hour for state government, and you are people seeking to be in state government. And I wonder what your thoughts are, about the weed program and about what that says about the capacity of government to carry out such projects. Micah, please start.
Look, I think the rollout of cannabis legalization has been a debacle in many different ways, and it does not speak well of the capacity of government to do big and different things. That's the short answer. I think that I would say, with regard to the proliferation of the illegal weed shops, fundamentally, that was a failure by the legislature, and I would suggest not by oversight, but by intention, to not give any government agency sufficient enforcement authority to shut down illegal stores. That was the fundamental problem. There was literally, effectively, no agency truly empowered to shut down illegal weed stores. And that, I think, was a failure of perhaps well-intentioned ideology taken too far. And the legislature went back in this year's budget, and I would say fixed it 85% of the way. They couldn't quite bring themselves to simply straightforwardly give the NYPD the authority to shut down illegal weed stores. You have to go through the sheriff, but I would say they've given the city 85% of the authority they need, and we are now seeing the city shut down a meaningful number of these stores, and that is progress. And as the assembly member, one of the things that I would do, and I'm taking a page out of our council member Gail Brewer's playbook, and I'm very proud that Gail is supporting me for this seat. I would maintain a crowdsourced registry of the illegal weed stores in my district, and be working with the local precinct and City Hall to monitor, track, and publicize what progress we are making on shutting them down. And beyond that, we also need to deal with the rollout of the legal industry and of the legal side of the industry, because at the end of the day, the illegal operators took advantage of a vacuum that was created by the failure of state government to roll out the legal side of the house, and that was a massive operational failure. And I am hopeful that it will correct itself over time, but it's an embarrassment. And at a minimum, we need to make sure that these illegal shops, because I've got friends who've got teenage kids who are getting bad stuff from these shops, and it's a quality of life issue, and it is all around bad, and it is Albany strikes again.
Thanks, Micah. Eli?
Yeah, I think that, there are two major things that happened with the rollout of legal cannabis. One, Micah just referenced, which is the lack of enforcement on the unlicensed shops, which has left a horrible taste in everybody's mouth and in this neighborhood. It seems like we can't occupy empty storefronts with bakeries or small businesses, but every other empty storefront can open up and be a cannabis shop. I kind of want to push back on Micah. If an illegal liquor store opened up in our neighborhood, it would be shut down immediately. I think there were adequate enforcement laws on the books that were not taken seriously by some of the enforcement actors. But I do agree that there is now legislation that allows them to be shut down, and we are seeing it. I mean, we were meaningfully seeing it. I was on Columbus Avenue 2 days ago, and I watched Fantasy Vibes get shut down on 107th and Columbus. We should all be upset about these illegal shops, not just because of the danger and the lack of quality and the blight on our neighborhood, but the tax revenue that is coming from these shops should be going to the communities that were most harmed by cannabis prohibition. That is how the legislature wrote the cannabis legalization bill. And that tax revenue is not going to those communities or to education or safety because it's not being spent in the legal stores. The second issue is that our legal shops have not been adequately supported or funded by this government. There was supposed to be a $200 million social equity fund that's propped up these legal stores, supposed to be 150 within the first year. That money never came, even though it was promised. And when it did come, it came from a partnership with private investment that gave out predatory loans to the people that were supposed to be starting the shop. You can read about it in the city. They've done some really good reporting on this issue. So that's why we don't have legal stores, because the money that was supposed to open them up didn't come from the government, even though it was promised. If you go to some of the legal stores, you should check them out. There are currently none in the 69th Assembly District, but should be some soon. It's a much different experience. And those individuals who are opening those stores have to go through a bunch of regulations, and they are paying their taxes, and those taxes will come back into our community. This is something I care deeply about, and I would work to ensure that all of these unlicensed shops are taken out of our neighborhood and that they are replaced with the safe, legal cannabis that will benefit us all as taxpayers.
Thank you. Melissa?
I think this is a good example of when good intentions go awry, and when folks in Albany who, aren't close enough to the ground don't understand how a policy is going to play out in practicality. I think, both the lack of resources and the constraints for legal weed shops just really were a huge issue. I think OCM as an agency was, mismanaged, underfunded, and really set up for failure. And that led to this super slow rollout of legal weed. On the illegal shops, I was pleased to see the shutdowns beginning. I'm seeing a lot of shops closed in our area. But as Eli was mentioning, these shops are representing a loss of revenue. So even seeing these shuttered ones, I'm not delighted by it, because I'm seeing where we could have a legal shop potentially, not all locations obviously, and we could be earning revenue for the state, and we're not. I'll say in my community board capacity, we've started to see these applications for legal licenses come across our desks, and it's still not really a well-designed program. It's confusing for locals to understand. I think business owners have trouble securing leases. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done to ensure that we can have good, safe, legal shops open in place of the illegal ones that were shut down, so we can ensure that we are capturing that tax revenue and reinvesting in the communities that need and deserve it.
Thank you. Jack?
Well, I too am very hopeful that the new legal changes will empower New York City to be able to shut down the unlicensed and illegal shops. That it helps nobody. It helps nobody. And we need to watch how the city is able to do it, and if necessary, strengthen that legislation. We need to streamline the approval process for legal stores and legal sales. And that also, as the other folks have mentioned, is going to lead to increased tax revenue. But also we want to right the past wrongs and give the people who have suffered for the marijuana laws in the past the opportunity to open these stores and make money and do the right thing for them also. So thank you.
Thank you, Jack. We're getting a little close time-wise. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. There's been some mention of senior citizens and the needs to meet the needs better about senior citizens. Let us, in the interest of time, just see if you have one thought, in 1 minute, about just two topics here that I think we want to, and then give you a chance to sum up. But brevity, I think, is important. I'd help you respect that. Eli, senior citizens, how do we make their lives a little bit easier? How do we make those who need support in our community receive what they need? It's also a recognition of the great value that we recognize those who have already contributed so much. So please, briefly, if you could, Eli, and we'll go around.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we all have a care story. I think, I have a 95-year-old cousin who lives in the city, and I'm the closest family member to her, and I'm constantly responding to issues that happen. She's a bit stubborn. She lives alone, and there's both loneliness and there are medical issues. And home care is not easy to afford and not easy to access. And we need to make sure that we are providing for our older adults care across the continuum. And just on the sense of people that have worked for us, we have a city that is trying to take healthcare benefits away from our city workers, trying to change their options for their healthcare plan. And luckily, we have a great organization of former city workers who's been able to fight back against this mayor and win several court cases, and are now active within their union and within the teachers union to try to fight back against some bad decisions made by that union to take away their healthcare options. I think we really need to be taking care of our city workers and making sure that they have the healthcare choice that they need and that best suits them. There's a state bill that would do just that, which I would be a co-sponsor of. So those are a couple of things that I think of.
Thanks, Eli. Thanks for the brevity also. Please, Melissa.
Sure. Yeah. I think, we need to take a really holistic approach, and that involves health, mental health, and combating feelings of isolation. So I think we need to do whatever we can to push back against the cuts threatened on the city level that would threaten services like meal delivery and services at senior centers. And, that's something I want to be a vocal advocate on. We need to make sure that seniors can stay housed and not feel that a rent increase could threaten their stability, and ensure that there's more senior housing being created so we can ensure people stay in safe housing that is adapted for their aging. And I think funding for home health care and home health care aides, or for people who are caretakers, is really, really important. I'm hearing from more and more family and friends that this is an expense that they just really can't bear on their own, or that they've emptied their life savings into. So that's something I definitely want to focus on.
Thank you. Jack?
Yes, well, to add, I am a senior citizen myself, so I am very interested in senior citizens issues. And one of the things I'm going to be proposing is adding to the standard deduction on New York City taxes and New York state taxes what the IRS has, which is an extra $1,500 deduction for people 65 and older. And that will put more money in the pockets of our seniors. I am actually strongly endorsed by the New York City Retirees Organization for being a member for 2 years and helping with the fight to retain our health benefits. What the mayor is trying to do is push us all from retiree health benefits of Medicare, along with a supplement plan, into a Medicare disadvantage plan, which is a nickname for Medicare Advantage plan, which has a lot less benefits, more restrictions, and less doctors.
Thanks, Jack. Micah?
Just briefly, a handful of things. One, we have to really tackle issues of accessibility in the neighborhood, particularly around our subways. It is incredibly hard for people in wheelchairs and who need assistance walking to be able to access mass transit other than at the 96th Street subway station. So that is one. I think we have to be very attuned and aware of issues of elder poverty and hunger. And we have a lot of older folks in the shadows in our community who are really struggling, and government has to be there to support them. Long-term care is going to be a growing problem. Long-term care insurance policies are basically no longer available. We have an aging population, and we want them to be able to live in this amazing neighborhood. It's a neighborhood that can support seniors, but we need to deal with the expense of long-term care. And related to that, naturally occurring retirement communities, NORCs, are a great way for people to age in place, and we should be promoting the creation and expansion and support of NORCs on the West Side.
Thanks, Micah. It would be probably improper to suggest that we could actually talk about education issues in 1 minute. Okay, that would depreciate the importance of that issue. So in the interest of time, I would say to you this, from pre-K to high school, do you believe we are meeting the educational needs of the children in our community to prepare them for moving forward? And maybe there is a yes, or maybe there is a no, and maybe there's a thought to share. But again, brevity is because of our time, not because of the lack of importance that anyone would deem for this issue. Melissa, you want to kick this off, please?
Yeah, I guess I'll answer that with sometimes. I think there's a lot of inequity even across our district where some people have access to really rich resources, good schools, UPK seats, 3K seats, and some don't. So I think we need to start addressing the inequity between schools and ensure we're getting resources to where they're needed the most for everyone's prepared. Sorry.
Thank you. Jack?
My short answer to your question is no. No, and I am the former supervising physician for school health for the Upper West Side of Manhattan for 8 years. I was in the schools almost every day. The answer is no. There is inequality. Some schools are good, some schools are less than good. We have to fix that. Period.
Micah?
You know, I've been a public school parent for the last 9 years. I've been, my family has been the beneficiary of some extraordinary public schools in our community, PS 166 and Booker T. Washington Middle School, chief among them. But it is certainly the case that not all kids have access to the same quality education my kids do. And that's something we need to tackle. And I'm very proud to be supported by both the state and city teachers unions because of my record on education, funding our public schools, working on literacy education, and that is work that I want to continue doing in the legislature.
Eli?
I would say no as well. I think we have a huge amount of inequity in our schools. We have, even within our public schools, we have, certain public schools where the parents get together and raise money to fund the public schools. That's the role of government to do. And it creates even more inequity when parents that are more well off can raise more money for certain schools, and other schools that parents don't have that access and are not benefited. So that's an important thing to take into account. I would be looking for universal 3K, universal pre-K at a state level funding. We can't afford education and rent in the city. And in our neighborhoods, many, many young families leave because of that. And that is a detriment to our city.
Thank you. So in closing, again, I know you can't do this in 1 minute. You probably can't do it in 5 minutes, but all you get is 1 minute because that's all the time that we have here. What is it that's driving you? I mean, here you are on the incredible Upper West Side, and you are working so hard in this campaign and prepared to take the job to spend so much time in Albany, which is not like the Upper West Side. I think you're all pretty aware. So what is driving you? And what's your final message here to the members of our community who are the voters, who are our neighbors, who are trying to figure out how to move forward, how to move our community, our city forward, and who are the best people to be in leadership positions? Jack, please kick us off.
Yes, 1 minute, 1 minute. If you're tired of the way things are being done in Albany, and if you're tired of business as usual, then it's time to vote for someone who is not a professional lobbyist, who is not an Albany insider, who is not a career politician or career bureaucrat. You have an appointment with me on election day to vote for the doctor. Elect a physician, not a politician. Let's make change by putting someone different in office who has been there, not been there before. If you have any further questions, go to my website, www.drjackforassembly.com. And thank you again for this opportunity to speak to people and to have your time today. And thank you to all the voters.
Thanks, Jack. Micah?
What's driving me, Steve, fundamentally is a deeply held belief that government is still the best force for change that we have, for all of its flaws. And the argument for my candidacy is that I have a proven track record on the issues we've discussed tonight of using government to make a meaningful difference. On mental health care, I was very proud to be the lead architect of $1 billion plan to reinvest in inpatient psychiatric beds, supportive housing, outpatient services, and begin turning the tide on years of state disinvestment on mental health care, on childcare costs. I was proud to be involved in lifting the state's childcare subsidy to create childcare eligibility for tens of thousands of more New York families, to expand the state's hate crimes law. We talked about anti-Semitism earlier, to protect abortion providers and patients, which is why I've been endorsed by Planned Parenthood. On virtually every issue facing our community, I've been involved in making real progress to help New Yorkers, and I want to continue that work in the legislature. And I'm very proud that leaders on the West Side that know what it takes to make change, like Gail Brewer, like Jerry Nadler, are supporting me, like Linda Rosenthal, champion on housing issues, because my record protecting tenants, fighting for affordable housing, are supporting me for the Assembly. But what matters most are the votes of Upper West Siders. That's what's going to determine this hopefully not too low turnout election. It would be the honor of a lifetime to represent my community in the State Assembly.
Thank you, Micah. Eli?
Thanks, Steve. I've been to Albany, and what I have seen there has frustrated and disappointed me deeply. Because what we have is a group of people up there who make decisions that have a huge impact on our lives, who have not spent their time on the front lines helping others and seeing how policies impact them. We have a political class that is beholden to each other, that is beholden to special interests, and that thinks that they can get together and choose our next politician and keep everything in a certain lane. And that frustrated me, and it should frustrate you. What we need are people who have strong moral convictions and who have lived their values. And that is me. I've spent my career fighting against inequity and fighting for fairness in our state. And I think when I look at this neighborhood, which is an incredible, diverse, important place in our city, what I would want up there is somebody who is not beholden to special interests, but somebody who is truly part of this community and is in community. I'm strong, I'm smart, I'm principled, and I hope that you'll support me on June 25th. Thank you.
Thank you, Eli. Melissa, final word?
Yeah, so, I've already been working for our community for years, so I really am jumping at this opportunity to continue that work with, of course, the added bonus of going to Albany for 6 months. But beyond that, I do think this is a moment where female leadership is incredibly important, and we need to be bringing up our next generation of leaders. But I also think the job of assembly member and representing this community, it requires someone who's tough and knows how to stand up for things, even when there might be a very loud vocal minority pushing back. And that's something I've already done for years and that I'm comfortable doing. I think we need someone who can cut through the noise of disagreement to try to bring people to the table and build consensus. That's something that I've also really gained a great skill at doing. And, lastly, I'll say personally, the one thing I've heard from people consistently in my life is that I show up for people. I am the one who will be there when you need to move, when you need help with something. I will do the things that are not fun. And I want to show up for my community. I want to show up for you all. So I'd be honored to serve as your assembly member and would really value your vote.
Thank you, Melissa. And thanks to all of you candidates for stepping up, for getting out there and participating in the process. And we wish you all, of course, great luck. One of you will represent us. And we will, of course, want to be in touch with you all the time to work with us. And good night, everyone. Thanks to everyone in the room and those on YouTube who have joined us. It's a pleasure to have you here. And have a good night, everybody, and stay cool in all ways.
Don't forget to vote.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.